Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we finally got a glimpse of the next historical Total War, Total War Pharaoh. Taking us back to the Bronze Age, around the time of the mysterious Bronze Age collapse, we're looking once more at a time period with quite a few blank spots as far as history is concerned, but it looks like the dev team is planning on using those blank spots to explore historical possibilities rather than delve into anything less grounded in reality. Now look, I've wanted Total War to explore this setting since before the Total War series even existed. My obsession with ancient Egypt began in elementary school, and it's been just escalating ever since. Every time Total War games had Egypt as a playable option, they were always my first pick for my first campaign, regardless of historical accuracy, and to this day, I do not leave the house without wearing my cartouche necklace, and this is something I got back in middle school. So yeah, it's safe to say I am very, very excited for Total War Pharaoh. With that said, and with me trying to temper my excitement as best as possible, let's take a look at the trailer before we get any further. Obviously, with it being a CG trailer, we can't really say much for gameplay here, but the setting allows us to make some assumptions, and the Steam page and blog post have a bit more to say as well. I'm not going to go too much into historical context in today's video, but maybe that's something we can explore somewhere down the line. So if you are interested in learning about the historical context of Total War Pharaoh, who the factions are, what the situation was, things like that, let me know in the comments down below, and maybe I prepare a video or two about it. But as far as that topic in today's video, all I'll say is that we can be fairly certain that the focus on battlefields will remain around infantry and chariots. They were the bread and butter of the era, and so one can imagine mechanics from Troy will be ported over. For what it's worth, I quite like the ideas behind Troy's unique mechanics, even if they weren't perfectly executed. Unit weight, for example, is a great way to set similar units apart from each other, but I felt like Troy didn't push the system far enough, which is something I said repeatedly over the course of Troy's time in the sun. So hopefully we see the devs build on some of those good ideas from Troy. This extends beyond unit weight, mind you. There were some unit traits that were particularly interesting too. Some units were supposedly better at flanking, while others were supposedly better at defending against flanking. But the fact of the matter was that none of it felt like it mattered on the battlefield. When you can't have rats charging goblins on the battlefield, these traits and specializations can really help factions and their units feel different in battle. The devs need to double down on the rewards a player gets for using units appropriately, and they also need to double down on the punishment for not doing so. Otherwise, those special traits and unit weight don't really matter. I want to see heavy infantry slow down to a crawl when trudging through mud, to the point that skirmishers can stand a short distance away and pelt them with javelins or rocks. Similarly, I want a heavy infantry unit charge to basically trample the first couple lines of a light infantry unit, toppling them over almost as if they were heavy cavalry meeting light resistance. My desire to see the mechanics from Troy further explored aside, there's much more to talk about, so let's move on. The Steam page says a lot of things that are fairly familiar to fans of the series. but there are also a couple of things that stand out in particular. For one, we have a GIF that looks like how duels were fought between leaders in Troy. I liked how that worked quite a bit, but I don't know if it fits a more grounded approach like Pharaoh supposedly is taking. The other fresh elements are the dynamic battles, specifically with regards to how weather can change mid-battle. We've had weather on the battlefield in previous Total War games, of course, and I imagine weather here will have similar impacts. But shifting mid-battle from clear skies to thunderstorms and sandstorms should create some tactical and strategic depth. I'm curious to see how you can plan around expected weather. Are seasons going to impact when certain weather conditions are more or less likely, determining when it might be better to do battle based on the makeup of your army? Is it entirely region-based? I mean, sure, you won't get sandstorms where there's no sand, but hopefully there's more to it than that on the campaign map. Finally, the mention of campaign customization features is interesting. Random start positions for all factions sounds absolutely wild, if not embracing a slightly more ahistorical approach, and there is mention of toying with natural disasters and resource distribution as well. I'm not sure if these are settings that I'd ever tweak myself, since I typically chase the historical experience, but it could be an interesting way to modify difficulty beyond a simple slider for campaigns and one for battles. Based on the FAQ and blog post, the game is set to release October of this year, sitting around the $60 price point, and the pre-order bonus is going to be a pair of cosmetic sets and early access to the game. I'm a little curious what exactly these cosmetic packs mean for future DLC in this game and for Total War in general. Now, strangely, I almost prefer seeing cosmetics on offer as a pre-order bonus. It's much better than factions being locked behind FOMO. Imagine if the Warriors of Chaos were included with Total War Warhammer as a base game faction, for example, with some extra aesthetic bonuses for early adopters. That feels better to me. With that said, cosmetics seem like they don't belong in a Total War game without something like Avatar Conquest, but I don't mind a bit of non-intrusive experimentation from time to time. I don't think this is some Doom Herald or anything, by the way, no. I don't expect loot boxes or cosmetic pack DLCs to flood our Total War store pages. It's just a nice take it or leave it bonus for early adopters, exactly how pre-order bonuses should be, at least in my humble opinion. Either way, this approach is fine by me, and if you buy anything but the standard edition, you'll get some of the upcoming DLC included at reduced overall costs. Right now, the plan involves 3 faction pack DLCs and then a campaign pack DLC afterwards. At launch, we're going to see 4 Egyptian factions led by 4 different pharaohs of the 19th dynasty, 2 Canaanite factions that seem to play a bit more loosely with precise historical references, and 2 Hittite factions led by important historical figures, one of whom is actually known for challenging the Egyptians at the time of his reign. Now, you can't really do the Bronze Age collapse without the Sea People, so it's possible that the faction packs will introduce them, as well as additional leaders for the Canaanites and the Hittites over time, or it's possible the faction packs focus on the base game factions, with a campaign pack DLC adding them at the end, introducing whole new systems to bring them into the game. Horde mechanics, more naval-related elements, and other new faction mechanics alike. There's actually quite a lot to play with here, and honestly, that last campaign pack DLC could be entirely unrelated, so to speak. If a game titled Pharaoh can include Canaanites and Hittites, maybe it can include Mycenaeans? Maybe it can tie into the historical elements from Troy? Either way, there's some really exciting potential here, and I'm curious to see exactly how this plays out. One thing that seems for certain, though, is that the Saga sub-branding is no more. Thrones of Britannia felt criminally underfunded, Troy had an identity crisis, and the only other Saga games were labeled as such retroactively, so they don't necessarily count as part of what I'm about to say here, but it looks like Creative Assembly's attempt to make smaller, more contained projects between major titles is coming to an end. I can't really say if that's a good or bad thing, honestly. I always liked the idea of the Saga titles, and thought of them as an opportunity for Creative Assembly to experiment with some new concepts or mechanics or ideas in general. The estates and specifics of minor settlements from Thrones, for example, or the way duels and multiple resources worked in Troy, and yes, even the truth behind the myth concept was an interesting experiment. Whether you liked it or not, it was an idea. Some of these experiments were intriguing, and in my opinion, should have been followed up on, and others were best left behind. But that's how the design process works. That's how the iterative process is supposed to be. Ultimately, though, that's not how the Saga titles felt, at least so far. None of those successful experiments saw their way into future titles, but that's probably because porting features over like that mid-production is extremely challenging, if not at times entirely impossible. So, what do we lose with the end of Saga games? Well, the lowered price point for one. I'm really hoping the price tag here comes with a suitably fleshed out game. I have no reason to believe otherwise right now, but it'd be a real bummer if we start getting annual Total War games with alternating levels of dedication behind them without that very clarifying Saga word in the title. Look, annual releases aren't good to begin with, at least in my mind, since you don't really get to take the learnings from your previous title forward into your next one because of how production timelines actually work, and eventually, the good stuff gets completely left behind. Now, that's not always an issue when going, for example, between Warhammer and Troy, or Warhammer and now Pharaoh, but if we start getting back-to-back historical releases, which is likely never going to happen, but let's imagine for a moment, if we keep getting back-to-back historical releases that don't keep iterating on good ideas, it'll really start to stand out. Again, that's not to say the end of Saga is a problem. It was a fun experiment, I wish it had gotten more love, and I totally understand why it's likely behind us, at least for the time being. But does that mean we have less experimentation to look forward to? Or does it mean we'll see bigger experiments moving forward? Time will tell. Keep your eyes peeled for more Total War Pharaoh content on this channel on the lead up to release. I definitely want to keep my eye on it as, again, ancient Egypt has always fascinated me, and I think there's a lot of promise in a game set in this era that simply doubles down on being historical even when dealing with some conjecture. I think the identity crisis that Troy had is what hurt it most, not knowing whether it wanted to be a historical title or a fantasy title, but here the developers seem to be committed to a historical angle. What's more, with this not being a Saga title, we should be able to expect a more expansive map. The Hittites are all the way up in Anatolia, and if Egypt extends south to Upper Egypt, that's a huge playground to work with the Canaanites sandwiched between these two massive hegemons. These are also fairly different cultures and peoples, and I want to see exactly how that's represented too, not just visually, but through varied campaign mechanics especially. By the way, folks, for more Total War Pharaoh content, don't hesitate to subscribe, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit that like button and leave a comment down below. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly, and of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.